In today's video, we're going to test to see if EA fixed their sim engine. We've all seen 4 lost teams, 5 lost teams, even 6 lost teams and more somehow make the playoffs. So I'm going to be simming 5 years into the future and see how does everything shake out. Are the rankings good? Who ends up winning the Heisman? And who ends up winning the playoff overall? I'm going to be doing the first 2 years in this video, and then the following 3 videos will come in the next video. So let me know what you guys think of these kind of videos. Other than that, let's go ahead and jump into it. Alright, starting with year 1. So before every season, we're going to take a look at the preseason top 25. So this is the AP poll and the coaches poll. So it's not really going to matter in terms of the playoff rankings because they do differ. But these are the initial rankings. As you see, you have Georgia at the top, then you have Ohio State. And then I also looked at the coaches poll, and you do get to see that Oregon is actually 3 instead of 4. So there is a little bit of a variance, but this isn't going to matter too much again because the college football playoff poll is really what's going to matter in terms of the rankings and the seedings. But I just wanted to see what everything looks like at the beginning of the season. So that's what we're going to do before every season. And then we're going to go ahead and also look at the preseason Heisman watch and see which players are projected to be the best and potentially win the Heisman. So looking at the Heisman, you can see that it's a lot of players that you may know. You got Ollie Gordon, Shedeur Sanders, Quinshon Judkins, Travis Hunter, and Carson Beck. So the fact that there are 2 Colorado players is kind of crazy. I'm pretty sure that this is going to be different once we get into the actual season. But what I'm going to go ahead and do now is sim to the first college ball playoff poll, and we're going to see where we're at in the season. So let's go ahead and jump to that. Okay, so looking at the first college football playoff rankings, you can see that Bama, Ohio State, and Ole Miss, who are undefeated, are at the top. Now, you do see Michigan, who is a 1-loss team, above an undefeated Penn State. But one thing that I was really looking for is see are there any teams with losing records that are ranked? And that doesn't seem to be the case. There are a few 3-loss teams, but they seem to be power teams. Missouri is the highest ranked 3-loss team, which is, a little interesting. And then Georgia is a 2-loss team ranked at 6. So I had to see which teams they lose to, because I feel like they had to have quality losses, and they lost to Alabama, who's undefeated, number 1, by a touchdown. So I think that is, I guess, a quality loss. And then they also lost to Kentucky, who is also a 1-loss team, and they're ranked number 8 in the country. Now, this does make me think that maybe Kentucky should be ranked a little bit higher. Maybe they should be above Georgia because they also beat Georgia. So this is the initial playoff bracket. So one thing to keep in mind how this bracket is built. So there are the top 5 conference champions automatically get a bid. And then also there is a spot for a group of 5 team. And then the top 4 conference champions will get the top 4 bids, and then the rest are at large. So it's kind of confusing. So you may see like the rankings are different from the seedings because it depends on like the conference standings in rankings. But in this case, we have Alabama as the number 1 seed, Ohio State is number 2, Louisville at 3, and Baylor at 4, because these are the current highest. Like these are, if they were to win their conference right now, these would be the seeds. And then you have Liberty, who is also a conference champion typically at this point. They are the 12 seed because they are the group of 5 team. Now, they aren't always put at the 12 seed. Sometimes they get higher up. And then you see the rest of the bracket is filled out as you can see. So hopefully this does explain a little bit better once we get further on. But now we will sim to the actual final rankings, and then we'll see where we're at from there. So Jalen Milroe did end up winning the Heisman this season. And then looking at the final top 25 rankings, now keep in mind, this does not determine the seeding. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 is not going to put the 1, 2, 3, and 4 seeds because it all depends on conference championships. Those will determine the seeds. And we'll see that these seedings are way different than what the actual polls will show. So this is the college football playoff for 2024, the first sim in the first year. So as you can see, Virginia Tech ended up being the 6th seed, even though they were ranked 4th because they lost their conference championship to Syracuse. So they were able to steal that first round bye. So that shows that conference championships really matter in this playoff format. So you have Alabama with the number 1 seed, you had Oregon with the number 2, Syracuse with 3, and Baylor with the number 4, and then Boise State ended up getting that group of 5 spot. Now they're 12th. Now sometimes the group of 5 team isn't always 12th. A lot of times they are, but sometimes they do get higher seeding, so it's not always they get put at 12th. And as you can see, they're playing Georgia, Georgia. You got Penn State and Ole Miss playing for the 8-9 matchup. The 11-6, you got Oklahoma State and Virginia Tech. And then you actually have the game part 2 happening between Ohio State and Michigan. So that is very interesting to say the least. So this is going to be our playoff. So we are going to go through and see who ends up winning these games. Alright, so moving on to the quarterfinal round, you can see that Georgia was able to beat Boise State. The game was actually not too far off. It was only an 11-point win for Georgia. And you see that Penn State did end up beating Ole Miss, and then Virginia Tech beat Oklahoma State, and then Ohio State beat Michigan. So the higher seed didn't always win in this case. And now you can see the quarterfinal matchup between Georgia and Baylor, Penn State and Bama, and then you have an all-ACC matchup, the rematch of the ACC Championship between Virginia Tech and Syracuse, and then you have Ohio State and Oregon at the Rose Bowl, which that used to be like a Pac-12 Big Ten matchup, so now you have 2 Big Ten teams playing in the Rose Bowl, which that is pretty interesting to say the least. So that is our quarterfinal matchup, so let's see who ends up winning these. Alright, we're now at the semifinals, and we actually have an upset here, but first we're going to talk about Georgia and Baylor. Technically, Georgia was the lower seed, but I had a feeling they were going to do better, because they were the number 3 ranked team, and they took care of business against Baylor. They won by 14, but you had Penn State and Alabama's perfect season. They take down the Heisman winner. They were undefeated, no longer. They're a first round exit. That would go crazy if that happened in real life. And then you actually see Syracuse owns Virginia Tech when it matters. Virginia Tech may have been the number 4 overall seed, but they lost to Syracuse twice when it mattered the most. So Syracuse is moving on, and then Oregon took care of business against Ohio State. They won by 12, so I think Oregon might be in a good spot, but Syracuse and Penn State, they're kind of on a Cinderella run, but I feel like we're going to a crash course between Georgia and Oregon, so that is my personal prediction. Okay, so Penn State is the SEC Slayer. They beat the number 6 ranked team. They beat the number 1 ranked team, and they beat the number 3 ranked team from Ole Miss to Alabama to Georgia. Now, the seedings are different, obviously, but they beat a bunch of top 10 teams on their way. They probably had the hardest run to the national title, and they did it. And they did it in pretty convincing fashion. They beat Georgia by 11 points. I mean, I'm honestly shocked. Now, you did see Oregon kind of handled business against Syracuse. So I have a feeling, you have an all Big Ten national championship. So that hasn't happened before, I don't think. So, the SEC, is the SEC cooked? I mean, Penn State just kind of ran through the SEC right there. Again, if this happened in real life, I personally would love to see it, because I feel like there would be a huge meltdown between all the SEC fanboys. But now we have a national title between Oregon and Penn State. So can Penn State finish up this magical run, or is Oregon going to win their first ever national title? Let's see. Well, it looks like Phil Knight is going to see Oregon win a national title before he dies, so good for him, I guess. But Oregon did end up winning the national title. I wish Penn State was able to finish off this magical run, but it looks like they did run out of magic there, as Oregon kind of handled business. They won by 12 points. Now, this is one thing that I do think is kind of annoying with this game, is that I can't watch these games. I can only force wins. I can't go and spectate these games. This would have been really fun to spectate this kind of game. I wish EA adds this in. The only thing I can do is just simulate it. So I apologize if this doesn't really look as appealing. I want to be able to watch these games, from the broadcast angle, but I can't do it. So I apologize about that. But Oregon is our first ever national champion for year 1, our first ever, first national champion in year 1. So now we're gonna start and move on to year 2 and see where we pick up from there. Alright, so this is what the year 2 preseason rankings look like, and honestly the top 10, or at least the top 9, seems about what I would expect. But what is Rutgers doing at 10? That is kind of shocking. I didn't check what their old record was last year, but they didn't even make the playoff. I mean, they weren't one of the top 3 teams in the Big Ten, so I don't know where this is coming from. But, I mean, okay, go crazy, right? Syracuse and Virginia Tech are the top dogs in the ACC still. And, the middle of the pack seems about normal. And then you have Purdue and Boston College a bit above Tennessee. So Tennessee's kind of slipping, or maybe just Boston College and Purdue are kind of stepping up. So I'm interested to see how this plays out. And then Kansas State always seems to do really well in sim for some reason. But yeah, let's see what the Heismans are going to be looking like, or at least the preseason Heismans. All right, so looking at the preseason Heisman Trophy watch, we have Connor Wegman at the top, followed by Evan Stewart, Nick Singleton, Damian Martinez, and Cade Klubnik. Now, one thing that I noticed from last year is that Milroe was nowhere to seen on the beginning, and I think the entire Heisman list was completely different by the end. So we'll see if any of these guys end up making the final list, or if any of these guys end up winning. But I have a feeling that this is the predictions aren't always as accurate, so we'll see. And also there's a wide receiver and 2 halfbacks, so I highly doubt that's the case. I don't think I've seen a halfback win the Heisman, at least not as likely. It's usually either a quarterback or wide receiver, so we'll see. So let's go ahead and sim to the first playoff bowl and see what we're looking at throughout the season. All right, now that we're a few weeks ahead, let's go ahead and take a look at what the Heisman is looking like. And it seems like Cade Klubnik is the only guy who's still on the list, and he rose from the bottom. He's now in second place, but everyone else is completely different. So that just shows that maybe the preseason Heisman rankings aren't really that accurate, but we'll see who ends up winning it all. Now, looking at the top 25 rankings, you can see that Wisconsin is 7-1, and they're the number 1 team. But Ohio State and Georgia, with 2 losses, are second and third above a lot of teams like USC, Oklahoma State. Those are ranked 4th and 5th, and they only have 1 loss. So I wonder if they have good out-of-conference wins, because USC is in the Big Ten, so that is a power conference. So I don't understand why that's the case. There are a lot of 2-loss teams. There are a few 3-loss teams as well. Again, you don't see any teams with losing records, so that's good that that's not happening. But the one thing that I'm really interested to see is how is the playoff bracket going to break out? Because I haven't really looked into the actual conference standings. So let's take a look at the playoff bracket. Okay, so we have the playoff bracket, at least after the first playoff rankings have been released, so this obviously isn't final, but this is interesting. So you can see that Wisconsin is ranked number 1, but I think because they don't have the highest win percentage in the Big Ten, they're technically not first in the Big Ten, which would be USC. So maybe the rankings aren't as accurate as what the seeding would be. Maybe the seeding is really what matters the most, and that's really how it determines who gets in. So I really think in the end that the seeding only matters much for the at-large teams. So it's if you win your conference, you're usually pretty solid. But it's just interesting to see. You have Georgia, then you have USC at number 2. You have West Virginia, and then NC State is the team. They always seem to come out of nowhere for some reason. And then Kansas State, again, they always are a team that does pretty well. And Hawaii right now is the Group of 5 representative. So interesting to see how this plays out. So let's go on to the end of the season and see where all these teams end up. All right, and Gunnar Stockton won the Heisman. Okay, so I mean, those numbers are pretty insane, but he wasn't even on any of the lists, so he must have came out of nowhere. But those are good numbers. Looking at the top 25, you see that Texas A&M is the number 1 overall team. Wisconsin is still up there. They're number 2. Clemson is 3. And Georgia, Kansas State. This doesn't seem too bad. Okay, so you see, whoa, Notre Dame is 7-5. That is a little wild. And then you see Tennessee at 6-6. Those are the only 2 rankings I'm really kind of annoyed with, but it doesn't seem too bad. Now, let's look at the overall playoff bracket, and wait, this is where it gets kind of crazy. So, first off, you see Georgia is the number 1 overall seed, and I think that's because Texas A&M never played in the SEC championship game. If you remember if you look back at those rankings, Georgia played LSU. So Texas A&M didn't even make the SEC championship game. So they got that free extra bye week, I guess. So I guess they got punished for that. And then also looking around, you can see that Kansas State's the number 2 overall seed. Michigan is number 3. Now, Michigan is the number 3 overall seed because they beat they beat USC in the Big Ten championship game. So they stole that spot for them. And then Hawaii is the number 4 overall seed for one reason, and that is because the ACC champion did not get into the playoff. Because you see Clemson is ranked 3rd. How the hell did they not win the ACC? Well, apparently they finished 4th. They finished 5-3 in conference, which is quite interesting because, I mean, if you look at the rest of the teams, I guess, I don't know, it's weird. They finished, 5-3, Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but yeah, so they didn't even make the ACC championship, so they had to go in as an at-large. So even though they were the number 3 ranked team, they got the 7th seed. So this playoff ranking is wild. So only one ACC team got in, and then also Charlotte. So the 5 conference champions included 2 Group of 5 teams. The Mountain West and the American got their conference champion in. So very interesting, nevertheless. So let's see how these games play out. All right, so now we're at the quarterfinal round, and I realized Texas A&M may have one of the easier paths to the playoff or to a national championship because, I mean, they barely beat Charlotte, so maybe they aren't the greatest team. They aren't the best team. So even though they're the number 1 ranked team, they have to play both Group of 5 teams. That's kind of wild, though. They got the easy route. I guess if you are the number 1 team, you should have the easiest plan or easiest path, but I don't think they did it that way on purpose. But they won by 6, so now they have to play Hawaii. Penn State continues to do what they do in the playoff and beat Ohio State, and it looks like Wisconsin put in the work on Texas, so Wisconsin might be a force. And then it looks like Clemson did beat USC, so that was a pretty heavyweight matchup. Even though they were seeded pretty low, they were pretty high-ranked teams. So that was actually a really cool first-round matchup. So now I think Clemson probably is going to be the team that was probably going to come out of that bracket. I don't know. Wisconsin might come out of there too, and then Georgia and Texas A&M. I feel like those are going to be the teams that come out of the top half, but who knows? I mean, if Hawaii somehow beats Texas A&M, this would be hilarious. And if Penn State loses or beats Georgia again, I would just love to see it because Penn State just keeps doing whatever they want to do in the playoff. And obviously they didn't win it last year, but their record in the playoff is pretty immaculate. So yeah, let's see how the quarterfinals goes. And then there were 4, and it looks like Hawaii's dream season ends with a first-round exit as Texas A&M will go on their cupcake playoff schedule all the way to the semifinals, where they do have to play against the number 1 overall seed Georgia. So they did not play them in the SEC championship game because they didn't make it, but now they do get to play them in the semifinals. So we'll get to see who really is the best SEC team in the country. Honestly, I gotta thank Georgia because you gotta think they're on the path. They want to win a title. There's no way they're gonna let that happen again because they got embarrassed last year. So we'll see. And then at the bottom of the bracket, you had Michigan lose to Wisconsin. So Wisconsin's keeping it going. I mean, I think Wisconsin is they're on that magical Penn State run like last year where they were just working teams. So we'll see how that ends up going. And then it looks like Clemson did end up losing to Kansas State, so maybe I was underrating Kansas State a little bit. I do think overall the winner of Georgia or Texas A&M is going to win it all. In my opinion, if Texas A&M beats Georgia and Wisconsin wins, Wisconsin will win. But if Georgia wins, I think if Georgia makes the national championship, they're going to win. That's just my opinion. So let's just go ahead and see who is going to make the national championship game in 2025. All right, so the national title is going to be between Georgia and Wisconsin, and I mean, just looking how Georgia's played in their 2 games, I didn't even think about how they played Penn State. They kind of blew out Penn State 42-27, and then they did the same to Texas A&M. Again, number 1 ranked team in the country, by the way. Blew them out by 14 points, and Wisconsin had a good game too against Kansas State. They kind of beat them down too, so I think Georgia's gonna win. They have the Heisman winner. I mean, I think this is where the magical run ends. I mean, it seems like last year we had Penn State, they go on their magical run. Wisconsin's going on their magical run now, but it always seems like it's going to strike midnight at some point. I think it's going to happen. I don't think Wisconsin's going to beat Georgia. That's just my opinion, but let's see who ends up winning it all. Let's see. And it does look like the clock did strike midnight as Georgia will win the national title. I don't sound very excited because I don't like seeing the big powers win, but I guess Georgia really did kind of power their way through. Now, I wanted to see how this game played out, so I decided to pull up the box score, and you could tell that Georgia got off to a 21-3 lead at the half, which, I was like, okay, this was going to be a blowout, but then Wisconsin had a pretty explosive third quarter, and it probably looks like in the fourth quarter the game got really close. Maybe there was a scenario where Wisconsin kicked some field goals or something, but Wisconsin made it a game, by the fourth quarter, but you could just tell that Georgia was they just had the offensive power. So yeah, Georgia is the national title. Well, did win the national title. So let's move on to year 3. Thank you guys for watching the first 2 years. I really wanted to get this video out as quick as possible just so I can see if you guys like this content. It does take me a long time to do this, and I don't have a lot of free time with work and all my other adulting unfortunately I have to do. So let me know if you do like these kinds of videos, and I will be making the part 2 that will cover years 3 through 5. So let me know. Thank you so much for all the support you guys have been giving me. Other than that, this has been Jognal, and I will see you guys next time.